Hey everybody, it's Matt, and what a hot mess of possibility and confusion, and just who knows what this is. So, doing, of course, my continuing reviews of all the solo Beatle albums in order of release, and I started with Paul, so we'll stick to that. We move on to his next album. Real quick, before I do that, somebody on one of my other reviews for Tug of War had sent me a message in my email, the Noble Surfer, said he saw this in the background and asked if I had reviewed this yet. I have not. Maybe I will in the future. We'll just kind of stay tuned to see. But I went and clicked to reply to answer his question on the comments in my video, and his comment wasn't there. And I looked for his channel and found it, and then I couldn't find. I don't know if you can send a private message through the channels anymore. So wasn't ignoring you, Noble Surfer. Wanted to let you know that I may review that in the future, and hope you're watching this video to get your answer there. So that's out of the way. So moving chronologically, we come to August 25th, 1986. That was the day that Paul dropped this on the world. Didn't do too well commercially. It did get to number 8 in England, but only got to number 30 in the U.S. And this was sort of the time when his albums were starting to not get as much radio play anymore and decline in sales, his new albums. So let's just go real quick. There's the cover photo. This was taken by, I don't remember the guy's name, but an old Hollywood photographer from the 30s and 40s that used an old camera they used back in those days to take this sort of Hollywood glamour shot of Paul and Linda there. I guess it's an okay cover. It's nice enough. Nothing too special about it. On the back, we've got track listing and other album information, so not too much there. The gatefold is kind of lame. These are just little drawings of where everyone was in the studio when each particular song was recorded. So not anything too exciting. And the inside sleeve, we just have the lyrics. And got some good lyrics on this album, and you got some typical Paul McCartney silly and nonsensical lyrics, trademark of all of his solo career, unfortunately. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Excuse me. This was an album I'd kind of given up on buying McCartney albums by this point. With Tug of War, I loved. Didn't get Pipes of Peace until years later. Only really knew Say, 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 the big hit. Heard a couple other songs on it and wasn't bowled over. Then Give My Regards to Broad Street. I never bought that album until years later either. Bought the 45 No More Lonely Nights, which I really liked. But went and saw the movie, which wasn't very good, and didn't really care for the rest of the music on there. And neither Pipes nor Give My Regards to Broad Street are very good albums. And this one is sometimes cited as maybe his worst album. There's other contenders. Wildlife you hear sometimes. Wings at the Speed of Sound. Mean Mr. Mayo's favorite, Thriving Pain, gets mentioned. But this is one that gets mentioned quite a bit. So, honestly, I thought, because I remember Spies Like Us coming out around this time, I was sure this was on the album, and I finally got a copy of this here, a few weeks back, about a month ago, and I was kind of surprised to see that it wasn't. So, I was looking at the track listing and thinking, I don't know that I know any of the songs on this. So I gave it a few plays because I didn't want to just play it once or twice and do a review, because that wouldn't be fair. Gave it a few plays to get familiar with it. But when I played it, I think there was one song, maybe two songs that I recall having heard before. So the rest of this was all new to me. His worst album, I don't know that I'd say it's his worst, but it may be his most boring album. I'll say that. But I was expecting it to be really bad from the reputation that it has. And it was not quite as bad as I was afraid it was going to be. but it's not very good either. And certainly, if you're unfamiliar with Paul McCartney solo stuff and wanting to dip your toe in the water, this would most certainly not be the place to start. This album would be one really only for the diehard Beatle fans that just have to have everything that the Beatles ever attached their name to. I can't really imagine just a casual fan getting too much out of this. But I did say it was not as bad as I was afraid it was going to be, and there is a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel of sorts. So we'll get into that. So with Pipes of Peace not doing really all that well commercially, it sold okay at the time, and it had the big hit with Michael Jackson, but it didn't go down in history as one of his big albums that everybody remembers. Venus and Mars, Band on the Run, Wings of the Speed of Sound, that type of thing. Largely forgotten, other than Say. Now I would venture outside of just the hardcore Beatle fans. Give my regards to Broad Street, bombed both as an album and as a movie. The fact that No More Lonely Nights was a hit aside. So it was middle of the 80s, and he was kind of floundering around, I guess, artistically and directionally, not sure what to do, which was not unusual because quite a few of the big 60s and 70s stars kind of lost their way in the 80s with all of a sudden there were new younger bands, new music, in many cases bands and singers that were making better albums, better current albums than the current albums of the old stars of the 60s and 80s. Neil Young did all sorts of goofy things in the 80s. The Who did some strange things, and the Rolling Stones totally lost the plot and did God knows what, but it certainly wasn't any good. After, say, Tattoo You, at least, anyway. So Paul started out the 80s pretty strong with McCartney 2 and with Tug of War, and then just sort of a string of okay at best albums. So with this album, he decided to go with a producer named Hugh Padgham, I guess is how you say the guy's name, who, because he wanted a more contemporary sound, that sort of what was going on in the middle of the 80s sound. And he got it, but that's not necessarily as one of those be careful what you wish for situations, because the Hugh Padgham guy had also produced Genesis, Phil Collins, Peter Gabriel, XTC, The Police, some people like that were having hits in the 80s. And problem is they were having hits, but the music they were making wasn't really very good for the most part. Well, XTC was making some good stuff, but the rest of those people were making pretty bland music. And by 86, music had sort of taken a U-turn for the worst, and that it's really never recovered from since, unfortunately. The 80s started out so great in the early days, 80, 81, 2, 3, 4. You just had dozens of albums every year that were really good albums, and then that sort of petered out by the mid-80s. So Paul here kind of sounds like that, those what other people were doing by 86. So he does sound contemporary for that time, but that's not necessarily a good thing, because contemporary for that time just wasn't really all that good for the most part. And 86 was a pretty bad year for music. There wasn't a whole lot of good stuff out there that year. So, yeah, it did. He also co-writes, 6 songs on here with Eric Stewart of XTC. There's a lot of guest starring roles on this album. Phil Collins shows up, Pete Townsend, some other people I can't remember right now. So I guess what else? Had some notes here, and I should have looked them over. Yeah, just following the crowd and doing what others were doing, but unfortunately, the others weren't doing anything that great either with this album. And kind of a shame, missed opportunity, that instead of working with people like that, maybe it would have been fun if he would have work with someone that was actually doing something good at that time. Joe Strummer was around. The Clash had broken up. Prince, I don't think that would have ever happened, but that certainly would have been interesting. Or just something crazy. Get with the guys in Husker Du and try to do something instead of working with the guy who's working with Phil Collins, who was pretty damn dull to begin with. Let's get into the songs. Side one, first song is Stranglehold, which was a 45 in America, I believe. It got all the way up to number 81, so it really didn't do much of anything. Kind of a 80s cocktail lounge music sound to it. It's half a decent song here, and it's half a decent subpar Phil Collins song, which even Phil Collins at his best, I'm not a fan, but it's also what this suffers from, as far as a lot of people call this one of his worst albums, is this song and a lot of the songs on this album are just not very memorable. And that's one of those rare occasions, sort of like the other one for me is Red Rose Speedway, that I'll play that album, pull it out and play it every once in a while, and 5 minutes after it ends, if you ask me how one of those songs go, I just can't remember, which is strange because Paul McCartney, more than more than anyone really, very few people at least, has that knack and that gift for memorable hooks and melodies and catchy songs. He's the best of the best in that department 99% of the time, but I guess every once in a while everybody has a bad day and he kicks out an album like this or Red Rose where most of the songs aren't that memorable. And even the McCartney songs that I don't like, Let 'Em In, Silly Love Songs, My Love, which is an exception on Red Rose Speedway. I mean, love them or not love them, you hear those songs once or twice and you're never going to remember, you're never going to forget them. But this album and a lot of the other things on Red Rose, too, as long as we're talking about that, they just don't stick with you. They're not very memorable. In some cases they're nice enough, they're just not memorable. In some cases they're not very good songs and they're not memorable. This doesn't sound anything like Red Rose otherwise than the fact that, pardon me, that a lot of the songs just, you hear them and 30 seconds later you don't remember what you just listened to. This song's pleasant enough that I'll give it a 6, but like I said, it's not a very memorable song. Second song on side one is called Good Times Coming, Feel the Sun. Sort of a return to the falsetto voice that he used in the song So Bad, which was a pretty good song. It's got a nice catchy chorus, but again, it's kind of bland. It sounds like that mid-80s Phil Collins, Robert Palmer type music that I never really cared much for. Um, it's not awful, but it's not good either. I'll give it a 4 for that song. The song number 3 is Talk More Talk. It's got just nonsensical, I should say, silly lyrics. Now, I believe it was Joe, Mean Mr. Mayo, that brought up the point that lyrics don't have to make sense in all situations. I like it when they do. I'm a lyrics guy, but sometimes I don't care if they don't. And it's fine with me if you have a song where the lyrics are silly or they don't make sense, as long as the song's cool or has something to it. Otherwise, I don't know for sure what John was rambling on about in I Am the Walrus. I'm not sure what Louie Louie is about. I think it's a guy that's in the Navy or on a ship that misses his girlfriend, and it might be dirty in some parts, it might not. Remember that whole big scandal? But the lyrics are mainly who knows what the hell they're going on about. But those are great songs. And in instances, which unfortunately Paul does way too much throughout his solo career, where the lyrics are so bad that you're listening to them and you hear him sing something and you're like, what the hell? Or they're just embarrassing to the point that you notice them. That's not a good thing, and he does that way too much in his solo career, unfortunately. I wish he would had someone around like a John Lennon to tell him that's crap, rewrite it, or I wish he would have taken the time to work a little bit on some of those songs like that, because they could have been all the greater had he. In fairness, he does have his share of songs that have good lyrics, that have a point to them. I'm not saying all his lyrics are silly and don't make any sense, but too often that's the case, unfortunately. So, Talk More Talk, you got the nonsensical lyrics, just sort of bland background music, and just a pretty forgettable song. I'm going to give it a 3. The production on this album, while I'm thinking about it, and I usually don't bring that up, I'm not a fan of more recent CDs of the last 10 years or so ago, like the Springsteen releases, with sort of that loudness wars, where everything's just sort of compressed together and sounds all muddy. This has very 80s production, and so I've said a lot of times before, there's good 80s production, there's bad 80s production. This is not the good 80s production. Parts of this album just sound really claustrophobic, and just kind of takes away from the recording. Most of the songs on this album are not that memorable or great anyway, so I don't know that it would have made a difference had they been recorded cleaner or better. But in some cases, the production on this is a distraction, unfortunately. So we go on to number 4 on side 1, a song called Footprints, which starts off with kind of a tropical Mediterranean feel to the music. This is a slight song, but it's a nice one. I like it. It's an affecting picture of sort of the power of memory and loss. He's talking about missing someone. The character in the song is missing a girl on the surface, and you don't know if that's a former wife or girlfriend that left him, someone that's dead. But it also, you can translate into that and just missing earlier part of your life, missing people that have passed away, missing your past, and being in a place where there's not much good right now and you're kind of lost. And I think it works well. It's not a great song. The lyrics are the strong point in this, but I'll give it a 7. I like that one, and that is yeah, that's the second to last song on side 1, and that's actually the strong point of side 1 for me. Side 1 ends with a song called Only Love Remains. It's a pretty song, kind of a mournful ballad. It's nice, but it really not much to it, unfortunately. So I'm only going to give that one a 4, maybe a 5, but I'll go with a 4. So now we flip it over to side 2. We get to Press, which is sort of kind of the title song in a way. Title being Press to Play, which when you press this, it doesn't actually do anything, unfortunately. Press got to number 21 in the United States, number 25 in England. It's the song with the most energy and sign of life so far to this point on the album. But it's got ridiculous lyrics. Oklahoma was never like this. And it's one of those where you're like, what? You know, just Paul, just spend a couple more hours on these things sometimes. Yeah, I think this was the first single off the album. Definitely not one of his more memorable or one of his better 45s, and he's had a lot of great ones through his solo career, but this isn't one of them. It's sort of there. I'll give it a 4. Second is Pretty Little Head, which was another single off the album. This sounds like one of those boring mid-80s Peter Gabriel songs, but toward the end of the song, it stretches out and nicely and sort of rolls along to a sort of a fitting end. Not a bad song in the second half, not a great song in the first. In the overall, again, I said it before, I'll say it again, not a very memorable song. I'll give it a 3. The video's cool. It's got that cute girl from that dumb Al Pacino movie where he runs around saying hoo-wah, hoo-wah all the time. And Annabelle Gabriel, or whatever her name is. The song's kind of a sequel to She's Leaving Home in a way, but nowhere near as good as that. So it gets a 3. Number 3 song on side 2 is called Move Over Busker. Upbeat song, dumb lyrics, but it's fun, and that gets a 6. So things are looking up a little bit. Fourth song on side 2 is Angry, and finally we've got a song that's halfway interesting and keeps your attention, or mine anyway. I like this. It's not great, but it's really fun. It's got kind of cheesy mid 80s production in parts of it, but here it works for some reason. Fun song. I like this. It's not, he's done way better, so it's not one of his classics by any means, but it's fun enough to get an 8 from me. Angry, that's a good one. And the album concludes with a song called However Absurd, which is a just an oddball, strange song. Just a funny little thing. Parts of it sounds like he's sort of trying to go for a Pink Floyd sound, sort of circa Pink Floyd of Animals or The Wall or something. And other times it just sounds like your trademark McCartney sound. Just a kind of goofy song, but a fun goofy song in a good way, and I give that one an 8. So that wraps up that album. The light at the end of the tunnel was, I don't know if you can see that, those are all the B-sides of 45s released off the album that did not make the album and should have made the album, because in a lot of cases they're better than most of what's on the album. So you've got, and I don't remember, I should have written down what these were the B-sides of, but I didn't. But Tough on a Tightrope, great little song. Look it up on YouTube if you don't have the single. I give that an 8. Right Away, W-R-I-T-E, Away, that's a great one. I give that a 9. It's Not True, which is not the same as the old Who song, but another great song. I give that a 9. Hang Glide, which was only released on a 12-inch special version of one of the singles and is otherwise not available, I don't believe, but it is on YouTube. It's an instrumental, kind of an interesting sort of techno rock instrumental thing. It's fun. I give that a 7. And then Once Upon a Time, Long Ago, which was not actually the flip side of one of these singles. It was the flip side of Spies Like Us. Actually a better song than Spies Like Us. I give it an 8. And had those 5 songs been on the album and some of these other songs knocked off in its place, this would have been a bit stronger of an album, and maybe even a good album. But as the album sits, maybe eventually there'll be an archive edition of this. I don't know that there ever will be, but if there is, they can include those things on there, and that'll help some. But as the album was released in 1986, and as it sits, probably a 3, but I could go a 3 to a 4 on this. I don't know that this is anything that I'm going to play a whole lot in the future, with the exception of maybe Angry and However Absurd and Footprints every once in a while. Not his best, and so things just weren't going too well for him from a musical standpoint in the mid 80s. And we'll be back with the next McCartney album, which will be coming soon.